This is Story Recapped. Today, I'm going to explain a drama sci-fi thriller film called Einstein's God Model. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. In an interview with Scientific American in 1920, Thomas Edison made a bold claim that it was possible to construct an apparatus to make it easier for people who passed on to communicate with the living. In 2002, Dr. Carl Meiselhoff and his assistant, Louis Mastenbrook, conduct an experiment using Edison's spectrograph DM field receiver, which would subject a human volunteer to electromagnetic fields and visual stimulation. Before turning on the machine, Meiselhoff tells the volunteer, Craig Leahem, to make sure he doesn't have any metallic items with him. As they proceed, Meiselhoff notes that Craig is the 31st human volunteer, and he recently lost his younger sister, Jenny. Moments after turning on the machine, Craig hears sirens and knocking. Craig then starts to feel like there's someone else in the room. A telephone connected to an apparatus suddenly rings, so Meiselhoff instructs Craig to answer it. When he hears a familiar voice, Craig tells the child on the other end that the tragedy was his fault. Craig gets agitated when the child starts yelling at him. Mastenbrook warns Meiselhoff that Craig is seizing, but Meiselhoff tells him to let the machine run for another 6 seconds. Craig suddenly throws up and screams in agony as his eyes burst. A decade later, a priest confronts a grieving congregation at a funeral with a sermon about the afterlife. During the service, Braden recalls a patient who saw her deceased children while doctors were operating on her. When he tells his colleagues about it, Bob hints that she was hallucinating because of the ketamine, which induces near-death experiences. He notes that a professor used it on graduate students as part of an experiment, but the institutional review boards shut down his lab. Devin, another anesthetist, then invites Braden to dinner later that night. He asks Braden to bring his girlfriend, Abby. When Braden tells Abby about the dinner, she's reluctant to go because they're celebrating her pregnancy, but Braden manages to convince her. During dinner, she unwittingly reveals that she's pregnant when she refuses to drink alcohol. When Abby goes to the bathroom, she suddenly experiences abdominal pain and starts bleeding. Meanwhile, Braden shows an engagement ring to his colleagues and tells them he will propose to Abby soon. Devin's wife, Donna, soon enters the bathroom and sees Abby passed out and bleeding on the floor, so they immediately rush her to the hospital. When Abby wakes up, she immediately asks about the baby, but Braden doesn't tell her that she had a miscarriage. However, she overhears it while Braden is talking to Devin. Distraught by what she heard, Abby flees the hospital. As soon as Braden discovers that Abby is gone, he drives around the city to look for her. Braden contacts Abby on the phone and apologizes for not telling her about the miscarriage. Abby thinks that the miscarriage is her fault, but Braden stresses that she can't blame herself for things she can't control. Abby then tells him that she's on Franklin Street. Braden almost runs her over while looking at the street signs, but Abby appears to be physically fine. As Abby attempts to unlock the door to the passenger seat, another vehicle hits her and drives away. As she succumbs to her injuries, Abby tells Braden that she hears sirens. Braden tries to keep her awake by showing her the engagement ring and putting it on her finger. As the snow starts falling, Abby sees glowing strings and orbs. She tells Braden that it's very beautiful over there. Braden performs CPR on Abby, but she passes away before the paramedics arrive. Braden can't accept losing Abby, so he searches the internet for information about near-death experiences. He then calls Bob late at night to ask him about the professor who used ketamine in his experiments. Bob informs him that it was a physicist, Dr. Carl Meiselhoff. When Braden looks up Meiselhoff on the internet, he finds an old video of an interview when he was a guest on a show called True Science. During the interview, Meiselhoff suggested that people can perceive the quantum universe at the moment of death. He then claims that a combination of sound waves and drugs like ketamine can mimic the moment of death in the brain. Braden manages to find Meiselhoff's address. However, Meiselhoff's wife, Margaret, informs him that he has already passed away. Braden shares that he recently lost his fiancée, so Margaret takes pity on him and invites him in for coffee. Inside, Braden mentions the device that Edison built in an attempt to communicate with the dead. Margaret hints that the device exists, but warns him that using it would have terrible consequences. Braden is still willing to pay any price to bring Abby back, so Margaret allows him to take the machine. As Braden assembles the machine at home, Mastenbrook uses another device to search for a particular signal. When Braden uses the machine on himself, he immediately suffers from a seizure. Soon, Mastenbrook detects the signal from Meiselhoff's machine and heads to Braden's apartment. As Braden's seizure continues, he sees a girl in the room for a brief moment. Braden passes out when Mastenbrook arrives and turns off the machine. When Braden regains consciousness, he hears Mastenbrook telling him, "It's very beautiful over there." Mastenbrook introduces himself and claims that he's there because he's following instructions from Meiselhoff. When Braden points out that Meiselhoff is dead, Mastenbrook confirms that he died by taking his own life. Meiselhoff was Mastenbrook's mentor, and they were both members of an international coalition of physicists called the God Model Project, which aims to define the laws of the universe. When Braden asks where Mastenbrook heard the phrase he uttered when he was waking up, Mastenbrook points out that those were Thomas Edison's last words. During dinner at a restaurant, Mastenbrook explains that their research is focused on string theory, which posits that the universe is made up of tiny vibrating strings. Meiselhoff connected it with M theory, which presupposes that the universe exists on a membrane. Mastenbrook illustrates the theory by using bread and jam. He notes that the bread is the membrane and the jam is everything in the universe. Mastenbrook stresses that the universe is stuck on the membrane, and the only things that can get out are gravitons. The gravitons go to other parallel membranes when they escape. He thinks that there is an infinite number of membranes, and each has its own universe. Meiselhoff hypothesized that the electromagnetic impulses from people's brains hitch a ride on gravitons to another membrane upon death. Mastenbrook then claims he can find someone in the afterlife and even bring them back. He asks Braden to get in touch with Craig Liam to be a conduit to allow his equipment to interact with the membrane. Braden finds Craig in a radio station, where he serves as a co-host and a spiritual medium. During the show, his co-host, Pastor Dave, asks him what heaven looks like, so Craig tells him, "It's very beautiful over there." Soon, a woman calls the show and asks Craig to contact her deceased husband. After the woman gives Craig her husband's name, he connects with him in another membrane. The woman scolds her husband for driving while intoxicated. To appease his wife, the husband holds out a seashell and asks Craig to give it to her. The woman, however, tells Craig that she doesn't want it. She discloses that her husband picked it up from the beach on their first date, and she buried it with him. Craig takes the shell from the husband before breaking contact. After the show, Braden approaches Craig in the bathroom and tells him that he needs his help to continue Meiselhoff's research. Craig agrees to go with him when he hears that Mastenbrook is involved. When they reach Braden's apartment, Craig makes it clear that he is still angry at Mastenbrook for making him blind. Mastenbrook notes that he modified Edison's machine to improve its accuracy, but Craig doubts it would help. Mastenbrook contends that they will soon understand the rules governing the universe because of Edison's machine. Craig, however, argues that the God model would never allow them to understand the rules. When Braden asks Mastenbrook about the God model, the physicist explains that Einstein came up with it when a student asked if he believed in God. According to Mastenbrook, Einstein drew a square on the board to represent all knowledge in the universe. He then drew a smaller square inside it to represent the knowledge that humans gained at the time. Afterward, he divided the inner square into 4 quadrants. The quadrants represent 4 areas of physics. The top left represents classical physics, while the top right represents relativity. Quantum physics is on the bottom left, and relativity quantum is on the bottom right. Mastenbrook notes that the inner box expands further toward the outer box with each discovery. Einstein believed that the box would never be filled because that would allow humans to know everything and become God. When Braden asks where the experiment would take them if they succeed, Mastenbrook sticks a pen way beyond the outer box and asserts that the God model is irrelevant. Later, Brady warns Craig that Mastenbrook plans to subject him to the machine. Craig is not worried because he has nothing left to lose, and he now knows that life is never lost. He stresses that it is only relocated. Craig then hints that he's volunteering again to find his sister, who died in an accident when she played with his gun long ago. Craig gets choked up as he tells Braden that his mother never forgave him. Braden encourages him to cry, but he notes that he can't. He takes off his shades to reveal that his eye sockets are empty. When Braden checks up on Mastenbrook, he finds him connecting another machine to Edison's device. Mastenbrook discloses it's a quantum computer, which can calculate mathematic equations exceptionally faster than regular computers. He assures Braden that it will allow them to contact Abby without any interference and trace her exact location on the membrane. Soon, Mastenbrook isolates Craig in a closet and connects him to the machine. A few seconds after turning on the device, the phone starts ringing, so Braden picks it up. Braden hears Abby's voice asking, "Why did you bring me here?" As Braden tries to make sense of her question, the rubbing wax that Abby uses for her artwork melts inside a bucket. Abby tells Braden that she loves him before their communication cuts off. When they check on Craig, he's having a seizure. Craig notes that he saw snow and surmises that it was snowing when Abby died. He then asserts that both membranes of the afterlife and the living world occupy the same space. Moments later, Mastenbrook tells Braden that Craig couldn't handle the frequencies emitted by the machine. The only way to make the machine work was to induce seizures to a level that would fry a person's brain. Braden surmises that they can also make it work if they introduce an anesthetic to suppress the seizures and let the subject emerge from the anesthesia once they contact the afterlife. Braden wants to contact Abby directly, so he visits Devon to convince him to administer the anesthesia. Braden brings a recording of the session and the melted wax to prove to Devon that he was able to contact Abby, but Devon is still skeptical. Devon reveals that he investigated Mastenbrook and found out he's a suspect in Meiselhoff's death. However, Mastenbrook wasn't convicted because they never found a body. Braden leaves without convincing Devon after he gets an emergency call from the hospital. When Devon takes off, Donna gets curious about the melted wax, thinking it's a mold of artwork, so she pours plaster in it to find out what it is. After melting the wax, she discovers that it's a mold of Abby's hand wearing her engagement ring. When Braden confronts Mastenbrook about Meiselhoff's death, he confesses that Meiselhoff didn't kill himself, but he didn't murder him either. Craig interrupts the conversation to tell Braden that Meiselhoff is not dead, though he's not alive either. Mastenbrook explains that Meiselhoff wanted to fix the problem he created because Craig's sister remained stuck between membranes after his experiment. Mastenbrook lost Meiselhoff during another attempt to communicate with Jenny. Devon soon arrives with the mold of Abby's hand and some hospital equipment. Braden is puzzled that there are now 2 copies of the engagement ring, so Mastenbrook explains that 2 objects can exist in 2 places simultaneously in quantum physics. Mastenbrook surmises that human perceptions or prejudices define the membrane where people go when they die, becoming heaven, hell, or nirvana. Soon, Devon takes Braden to the closet and injects him with an anesthetic to prepare him to contact Abby. When Mastenbrook turns it on, Braden seems in agony, so Craig asks Mastenbrook to shut it down. However, Mastenbrook tells them that he needs to keep the machine running for 6 more seconds. Braden suddenly disappears from the chair. He soon finds himself in a space between membranes. He sees a figure wearing a headgear similar to the one connected to Edison's machine, but the man vanishes after a few seconds. When Mastenbrook opens the closet, Meiselhoff is inside instead of Braden. After Braden takes off the headgear, he finds himself in the closet, but there's no sign of anybody else. He tries to get out of the closet, but he returns inside when he steps out of the door. Soon, he sees a young girl in front of Mastenbrook's diagram on the floor. Braden figures that the girl must be Jenny. Mastenbrook thinks that Braden is trapped between membranes in place of Meiselhoff. He claims that it's impossible to get Braden back without exchanging another person, but Meiselhoff contends that there is a way to do it. Craig agrees and explains that they can retrieve Braden by merging the 2 membranes for a short period and separating them. In the parallel dimension, Braden tries to get out of the closet again, but Jenny tells him that he can't leave until the process starts. Mastenbrook turns on the machine again to retrieve Braden after connecting Craig to it. When the phone rings in the other dimension, Braden can finally leave the closet and answer the call. He hears Craig's voice, but Craig drops the handset after Mastenbrook increases the machine's frequency. Bright lights that move like smoke descend from the sky as the 2 dimensions merge. Moments later, Abby's artworks appear in front of Brayden. Soon, Abby emerges in the form of a glowing orb. Brayden takes out the engagement ring and proposes to her, so Abby transforms into her human form. Brayden puts the ring on her finger and kisses her. He then tells Abby that he's taking her home. Not far, Craig takes off his sunglasses and finds that his eyes have been restored. Jenny runs to Craig and embraces him. Craig calls Brayden's attention and says hallelujah before an orb sends him and Jenny to a parallel universe. Another orb takes Brayden and Abby to a different universe. As the membranes split, Mastenbrook peeks at the machine and sees numerous parallel universes aligning before a burst of light hits his eye. At a cemetery, Jenny rubs wax over Abby's gravestone for her artwork. Craig tells her that it's time to go, so she picks up all her tools and leaves the cemetery with him. In another universe, a visibly pregnant Abby lies comfortably in Brayden's arms inside her art studio. During a guest appearance in True Science, Mastenbrook, who is now blind in one eye, recounts his successful attempt to send people to parallel universes. When the host mentions M-theory, Mastenbrook contends that it's no longer a theory because he has seen membranes with his own eyes and stresses that they're beautiful.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.